Motion carried. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver any cost-of-living relief for Saskatchewan families. Saskatchewan currently leads the nation in mortgage arrears, in child poverty, and in the number of people who are struggling just to pay their bills. And it's time for that Premier to finally deliver some relief. Why won't the Premier listen to the people of the province and finally give Saskatchewan families a break at the pump? Why won't he cut his fuel tax today?
Recognize the Premier.
As I say many times and going to continue to say in the floor of this Assembly, there's over $2 billion in each and every year's budget, Mr. Speaker, in affordability measures for Saskatchewan families. I suspect in about 24 hours, when the Deputy Premier rises to her place right here, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow, that we are going to see not only those $2 billion reconfirmed in this year's budget, affordability measures for Saskatchewan families, Mr. Speaker, but you may even see a few of them enhanced over the course of the next year, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Saskatchewan remains to lead the nation when it comes to affordability measures that are in place. In fact, Regina, the city of Regina, was just assessed as being one of the most affordable cities to live in the nation of Canada, Mr. Speaker. And the fortunate thing about living in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, with almost 20,000 jobs available added just this past year, Mr. Speaker, is you're going to be able to find a career here as well, Mr. Speaker. This is how we collectively, on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, have focused on continuing to strengthen our economy while keeping life affordable for Saskatchewan residents, so we can ensure that we are building a brighter future for all.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
So affordable, Mr. Speaker, that we have 4 times the national average of mortgage arrears. This tired and out-of-touch government clearly isn't listening. They're not listening on affordability, and they're not listening to those who are ringing alarm bells, Mr. Speaker, about the state of our healthcare system. Now let's look at the report that the minister released yesterday. Since this Premier came to office in 2018, 6 years ago, we have lost 14 family doctors from the province. How does the Premier defend that record, his record, of losing family physicians from this province?
Recognize the Premier.
As always, you need to ensure that we are checking the work that comes to the floor of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker. I would say that when the members opposite are referencing the addition of 14 doctors, Mr. Speaker, what they are referencing is active physicians, Mr. Speaker. That includes active physicians that are doing fee-for-service. So it does not include any of the salaried physicians across the province, Mr. Speaker.
NDP map.
So I would say that those salaried physicians, 6 or 8 that work in my community, they count too, Mr. Speaker. They count, Mr. Speaker, and when you include all of the physicians added over the last 4 years in this province, Mr. Speaker, it's over 200 physicians into communities across Saskatchewan. 89 of those are general practitioners, 109 more specialists, Mr. Speaker, offering services to Saskatchewan families. That is due to the most ambitious health human resource plan in the nation, Mr. Speaker, has been enacted by these 2 ministers, Mr. Speaker. It continues to show successes in our rural communities, in our larger centres, Mr. Speaker, in the way of fewer disruptions and a shorter surgical wait time, Mr. Speaker. That, Mr. Speaker, is ensuring that is possible due to the strength of the economy that we have in this province, Mr. Speaker, and it's helping make a brighter future for all.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier can check in with his lines and his spin, but I will listen to the people of this province where 1 in 6 cannot find a primary care provider in this province today. That is his record. People in this province don't have access to a doctor, and when they don't have that access, Mr. Speaker, they wait for care in walk-in clinics or in overcrowded emergency rooms. Mr. Speaker, this isn't simply about numbers. It's about people, and it's about their health care. How does that Premier defend his record of increasing wait times and decreasing family docs and service in this province?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, for a party that would actually like to form government, how can you trust the fact that they can't even interpret a document, let alone generate one, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, over 200 physicians added, Mr. Speaker. And in addition to that, as people across this province, and we were at the SARM convention and heard this loud and clear, Mr. Speaker, as people across this province look for access to medical professionals, Mr. Speaker, they also advocate for access to nurse practitioners. Nurse practitioners, Mr. Speaker, of which have increased 236% since we moved the members across the floor here, Mr. Speaker, over to the opposition side. That's being supported. I would go back to our Health Human Resource Plan, the most ambitious plan in the nation of Canada, through student loan forgiveness programs, through graduate retention programs, through income tax credits that are available, through clinic placement and bursaries that are available, and through the most recent announcement of scope expansion and allowing nurse practitioners to practice on their own just this past week, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are more physicians practicing in the province of Saskatchewan thanks to the most ambitious Health Human Resource Plan in the nation. There are more nurse practitioners practicing in Saskatchewan communities and offering services to Saskatchewan families than there was last year, Mr. Speaker, and a whole lot more than there was under the members opposite.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I will take no lessons from a Premier who blew his budget by $2 billion and brought our healthcare system to its knees in this province, Mr. Speaker. They're failing across the board. But nowhere, Mr. Speaker, are they failing more than when it comes to women's health in this province. Since that Premier came to office, we have seen a 6% decrease in OBGYNs in our province. It's the lack of access to doctors and specialists that means longer wait times for Saskatchewan women, Mr. Speaker. That's right. And when the Premier does come around to doing something about it, what's his plan? To send women to a donor in Calgary at 10 times the cost for what we pay here at home. Mr. Speaker, will that Premier will he accept? He wants to get up and spin his lines, Mr. Speaker. Will he accept any responsibility for the damage he's done to women's health in that province?
Recognize the Premier.
I do apologize. I thought the Leader of the Opposition was finished, so I do apologize, honestly, for standing up too early. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to all Saskatchewan residents' health, in particular women's health in this province, it most certainly is a focus of this government, Mr. Speaker, and I think in fairness it's a focus of everyone on the floor of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and everyone across the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I would point more, I look at the offer for women to go for breast treatment, Mr. Speaker, in Calgary in a little bit different way. Those that choose to go most certainly can, and it shortens the list here in Saskatchewan. That is one way that we're able to lower the wait list that not only we had in Saskatchewan, but was present across Canada, Mr. Speaker. And I would also point to the more recent investment, Mr. Speaker, the announcement of the Breast Health Centre of Excellence right here in Regina, Mr. Speaker, going to greatly streamline the diagnostics, Mr. Speaker, the mammograms, all of the services that are required by women, Mr. Speaker, on an annual basis, greatly streamline it not only from the patient's perspective, but also from the physician's perspective, Mr. Speaker. It's going to help us attract professionals into the community of Regina to service all the women in southern Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, and it certainly is going to help when it comes to the quality of service and the quantity of service that is offered to women in the southern half of this province.
Recognize a member from Regina West Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver on health care. The report clearly shows this government is failing to keep new medical grads here in our province. The report shows only 43% of psychiatric grads stayed in Saskatchewan. Anesthesia, 38%. Surgery, only 17%. The worst retention in new medical grads, 14% of pediatric specialists stayed in Saskatchewan after completing their training. Why isn't the Sask Party doing anything at all to keep these grads here to provide care for Saskatchewan people?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to begin by thanking all of the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, the specialists that work in our hospitals and healthcare facilities across this province for the amazing work that they are doing supporting Saskatchewan's healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, as the Premier alluded to, we have taken some very aggressive steps when it comes to recruitment and retention of healthcare workers in this province, Mr. Speaker, and implementing new initiatives when it comes to working to recruit additional specialists into this province. Mr. Speaker, as an example, we are are actively recruiting for a number of more anesthesiologists right across Saskatchewan for cities like Regina, like Swift Current, like Prince Albert, Mr. Speaker. We now have an anesthesiology recruitment and retention incentive of $200,000 over 5 years, Mr. Speaker, tied to return for service, Mr. Speaker. These are some of the initiatives that we are implementing in this province to make sure that we are doing everything we can in a very competitive field across Canada when it comes to recruiting healthcare specialists here in our province.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh.
Mr. Speaker, they're failing to keep new grads here, and they're failing to keep doctors in rural Saskatchewan. Now, they don't like it when we talk about rural Saskatchewan, but that's their record. Now, when the Premier came into office, there were only 265 rural family doctors. Now, there's only 257. That's a loss of more than one doctor per year, every year, gone from rural Saskatchewan. No wonder people can't find a family doctor. Why? Why are there fewer rural doctors working today than when Brad Wall was Premier of this province?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More positive quotes from the opposition about the former Premier of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say a couple of things. Mr. Speaker, we have 1,000 more doctors in this province than we did back in 2007, Mr. Speaker. The NDP at that time, the NDP opposition, in their time in government, Mr. Speaker, had the worst recruitment and retention record in all of Canada, Mr. Speaker, when it came to physicians, when it came to nurses, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this winter, Mr. Speaker, we signed a new agreement with the Saskatchewan Medical Association. This is fairly new. The member for Regina Elphinstone might want to pay attention to it in case she missed it the first time. Mr. Speaker, a $245 million agreement with the SMA where, and we'll listen to quotes from the president of the Saskatchewan Medical Association, Dr. Annette Epp, who said, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, "Our goal was to reach an agreement that recognizes the critical role physicians play in our healthcare system and provide the support they need to deliver high-quality, accessible patient care. I firmly believe that this new agreement acknowledges and values Saskatchewan physicians," Mr. Speaker. That's from the quote from the president of the SMA, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government's record is one of fewer doctors and longer waits. Right. That is a fact. Now, tomorrow, the Premier and the Health Minister will roll out some lofty rhetoric about hiring more doctors in rural Saskatchewan. But that's not their record. I'm told that the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. And this Premier's past behaviour is losing rural doctors every year. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker. What does the Minister of Health say to rural people in his riding who can't see a family doctor because the number of rural doctors has decreased under this Premier's watch?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, lots of huffing and puffing for the member from Regina Walsh Acres, Mr. Speaker. What you'll see tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, is you'll see this Minister of Finance stand up tomorrow and table a document that talks about one of the biggest investments we've ever seen in the areas of care, communities, and other areas, Mr. Speaker. Classrooms, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member for Indian Head Milestone. And a very significant investment into healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Building on our previous record, and the member opposite wants to talk about the record, how about 550 more training seats across this province and a variety of different health designations, Mr. Speaker. Last week's announcement of expansion of nurse practitioner services, 25 more nurse practitioner positions to start, as well as a couple of independently operated, publicly funded nurse practitioner clinics, Mr. Speaker. More pilot projects around physician-led primary care clinics in this province, a pilot project around expanding the scope of practice for pharmacists in this province, Mr. Speaker, so they can deliver more care to people across this province. You're going to see more of that in tomorrow's budget, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, the clock is ticking for this tired and out-of-touch government to get a deal with Saskatchewan teachers, and that's exactly what students and parents are asking this minister to do. Teachers deserve so much more than the utter disrespect shown by that minister. They deserve a deal that addresses class size and complexity, and it is that minister's job to do that. Why won't the minister do his job, get a deal on class size and complexity today.
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, over the last several days, I've heard from parents, from teachers, from students and athletes around the province, Mr. Speaker, who are in a frustrating situation, having their provincial basketball championship and other extracurriculars taken away by the decision of the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation leadership to place sanctions. A decision, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, that lies directly with the STF leadership, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have seen several areas of movement from the government trying to get a deal done to ensure that kids can be in the classroom and on the court of play, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the union leadership wants to say that this is all about the kids, Mr. Speaker. That's what the union leadership wants to say. But now it's kids who are paying the price for the STF's job action, Mr. Speaker. It's not too late for the STF leadership to reverse that decision and allow extracurriculars to continue going on, Mr. Speaker. I'm calling on the STF leadership to reverse that decision and let them play.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, the responsibility for this dispute falls at the feet of one person in this province, and it's that minister sitting. He alone has the power to make Labour action go away. He alone has the power to keep hoopla and school trips going. The two sides are so clearly at an impasse, Mr. Speaker. They should listen up. All he has to do is send the issue of class size and complexity to arbitration, and the job action will end. That's all he has to do. Why will the minister get out of the way, send this to arbitration, so a deal can be struck today?
Good job. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I remember being a coach, a basketball coach, high school basketball coach in North Battleford in 2020, Mr. Speaker, when the STF made a similar decision to impose sanctions on extracurriculars, and it took away our regional tournament for my Vikings boys team that was supposed to be heading off to Weyburn for that regional tournament. Mr. Speaker, I will remind members, I will remind students and parents and coaches around the province, Mr. Speaker, that the STF have the power to declare job sanctions and the power to choose which specific dates. What the STF leadership doing, Mr. Speaker, are targeting specific extracurricular activities which affect kids coming from Moose Jaw and Wynyard and communities in all areas of the province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that member opposite wants to talk about my role in this, Mr. Speaker, in bargaining. I'll tell you what I've done, Mr. Speaker. I have brought forward a renewed mandate, Mr. Speaker, with a reasonable salary offer, Mr. Speaker. We've brought forward the largest ever school operating increase in the history of this province, Mr. Speaker. We want to get a deal done.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is this government has taken power away from teachers, power away from boards, and they've given the power to that minister. He's the one who has the power to get a deal done, and he won't do it. Saskatchewan people are tired of the arrogant antics from that minister. We see that arrogance day in and day out. If he believes in his numbers, then he can prove it and send it to an independent arbitrator. Mr. Speaker, if he believes in his facts, if he believes in his own words, then he can prove it today. He can stand in his place, send this to an independent arbitrator to get a deal done. He can prove it. Does he believe in his own words? If he does, stand, take his feet, commit this to arbitration, end this dispute right here today.
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
You know, Mr. Speaker, what I have heard loud and clear around the province, Mr. Speaker, having been on the phone with members of the organizing committee of the Hoopla tournament, Mr. Speaker, with coaches, with players, with parents, Mr. Speaker, with students around the province, Mr. Speaker, they want to play basketball this weekend in Moose Jaw, Mr. Speaker. That's what they're hoping to do, Mr. Speaker. But the only thing standing in the way of that, Mr. Speaker, is the STF's decision to declare sanctions on extracurricular activities around the province, Mr. Speaker, that targets this specific tournament, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would actually challenge the STF leadership to put it to their membership. Do they want to coach this weekend? Do they want their students to be playing basketball this weekend, Mr. Speaker? It is time for the STF leadership to stop taking this opportunity away from students and coaches and let them play.
Recognize the member from Regina Alpha Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, if that Minister of Education values the work of teacher, he better damn well start showing it to the people of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, we've asked about their record on healthcare and education. The Sask Party doesn't like it. Yesterday, we asked about their record of debt, and they really didn't like that, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about how we got to the point in Saskatchewan where this Premier has accumulated more debt than Grant Devine. It's because of their sweetheart deals, mismanaged projects. That is a fact. $240 million on AIMS, a computer system that still doesn't even work. How does the Premier justify spending $240 million, adding that $240 million to Saskatchewan debt on a computer system that still doesn't work? Hear, hear.
Just like to caution the member to watch your language. I recognize the Finance Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to read a quote from a news release that went out in the province a few years ago, but I've been here for a few years now. And it is, I quote, $407.3 million capital budget, our largest ever. That is the news release that came from the NDP 2007 budget. Mr. Speaker, $407.3 million of a capital budget. Mr. Speaker, in just a few more hours, you're going to see a capital spend 10 times that amount, Mr. Speaker, because this government is investing in roads, it's investing in hospitals, it's investing in healthcare, in schools, Mr. Speaker. The NDP never invested in any of that. They closed schools, they closed hospitals, they let the highways crumble. We're planning for growth, Mr. Speaker, and they did nothing but sit on a decline in this province.
Recognize the member from Regina Alpha Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, that Minister of Finance needs to start living in the now. Speak to her record. 17 years of Sask Party government, Mr. Speaker, and the list of mismanaged projects and special deals is long. That's how this tired and out-of-touch government added more debt to Saskatchewan than Grant Devine. Special deals like the one we saw in Wascana Park, $11.6 to settle a lawsuit with one of the Sask Party's biggest corporate donors, all to make sure that all the dirty details of that deal didn't see the light of day, Mr. Speaker, and all while running a deficit. How does the Sask Party justify adding $11.6 million to the debt to keep the details of this deal under wraps?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
You know, I love what the member opposite said. You got to live in the now, live in the now. Well, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I've been in this House a lot of years. This fall will be 25 years. And even I didn't serve her under Grant Devine, and that's who she brought up. So who's not living in the now? You know, Mr. Speaker, the old are nice of saying, you know, the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. Let's just talk. Let's just talk for a minute about what the child care system was under that NDP government. They had paper files of children in our care. I can't express enough how awful that was. If a child moved from one community to another, the paper file may or may not go with them. You could track a library book better in the province than you could the children in our care under the NDP, and yet they criticized getting an IT system, Mr. Speaker. That was the NDP when they were in government, and we should never, ever, ever forget it.
recognize the member from Saskatoon-Wasso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So far this year, we've seen 74 families lose loved ones to the overdose crisis. 74 families. Last year, 476 families lost a mother, a father, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, or a colleague. So many families are scared and worried that their loved one could be next. The fact is there are few families left in this province untouched by this crisis. We are in a crisis, and this government is choosing not to listen. Mr. Speaker, I ask, how many families must go through this senseless loss before the government will listen and implement an evidence-based plan that will save lives?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said before, and I will say again, every loss of life due to an overdose is a tragedy, Mr. Speaker, and that's why our government is focused on treatment and recovery of individuals who are battling addiction, Mr. Speaker. We are sending the message to these individuals, Mr. Speaker, that no illicit drugs are safe. Providing individuals who are battling addiction with crack pipes and instructions on how to use drugs, Mr. Speaker, sends those people the wrong message. We are focused on treatment and recovery, Mr. Speaker. We are sending the message to these individuals that we value their health and their life and their safety too much to allow them to continue to live in a life of addiction. And the message that we are sending these individuals is that there is hope for recovery and there is help available in treatment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.